research. I'm going to be talking about one of my scholarly projects, which is using presenter-initiated and generated live educational tweets to broaden the traditional conference workshop reach. I have no conflicts of interest other than you are free to live tweet my presentation. So Twitter is a social media platform where users send and share short messages containing less than 140 characters. These are called tweets. This is being increasingly used by a community of physicians on Twitter for networking, information sharing, online journal clubs, and attending national conferences virtually. Twitter offers the possibility to reach a larger virtual audience than the traditional lecture experience. Some Twitter-specific vocabulary I'll be using during my talk. A tweet is a post that's made by a user on Twitter. A retweet is a reposted version of this that's typically unchanged from the original tweet. A hashtag is a keyword that's used to categorize tweets and allows them to become cataloged and searchable. And live tweeting is the process of posting comments about an event in real time. So my group presented a workshop last year at 2 national conferences. We decided we wanted to try something different and incorporate Twitter into our learning plan. Live tweeting at medical conferences is often done by learners but can be fraught with limitations. For example, learners can incorrectly tweet information about a presenter's lecture, as well as they can only present the things that they may think are most useful. So a presenter may have certain objectives for their study that may not come across with learner-generated tweeting. So the objectives for our study were to increase the dissemination of our content virtually using Twitter and to improve upon these limitations of learner-driven live tweeting. We hypothesized that we would be able to increase the reach of our workshop content through the use of Twitter. So we presented a workshop entitled Not Another Boring Lecture, which Dr. Burkhart briefly brought up earlier during his talk. This is a didactic series created by EM educators to help introduce novel teaching techniques to people to kind of transform their traditional lectures into more interactive sessions. We first developed the workshop content, and then we created our intervention, which we coined as Piglets, or presenter-initiated and generated live educational tweets. We set up a prospective single-arm study where we created these Piglets as our intervention. We tweeted before the conference workshops to generate interest, and then during the conferences to put out our supplemental material and key points. And then we did a brief amount of tweeting after the conference just to answer any questions that may have come through from virtual learners. Lastly, we used a program to analyze our outcomes called TweetReach Pro, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So presenter-initiated and generated live educational tweets are tweets that are developed by the presenter prior to the lecture to highlight any key points that they want to disseminate to their virtual audience, and also to provide any links to supplemental material. We took a multimedia approach to our tweets, so we found that user engagement is increased in tweets that are more visually appealing, so if they included pictures or hyperlinks or videos. So we took that approach when we were able to do so. We created 2 novel hashtags for our study, hashtag Not Another Boring Lecture and hashtag InnovateMedEd, and included these in all of our Piglets. And when space allowed, we included the conference-specific hashtags, PAS Meeting and SAM15. So this is an example of one of our Piglets from the workshop. So this is an example of the multimedia approach. We actually used one of the slides that was presented in the workshop itself, as this was a visually appealing slide. And you can see that it includes the two of the hashtags that I discussed previously. Our targeted outcomes were the number of tweets generated from presenters versus learners, reach, which is defined as the number of unique users to whom the content was delivered, and exposure, which is defined as the number of times content was delivered. I like to think of reach and exposure with the example of a billboard. So if you're driving down the freeway and you pass a billboard for McDonald's, you pass it twice, then you've gotten 2 units of exposure. You've been exposed to that content twice, but it's only reached 1 person. So the program that we use is called TweetReach Pro. This is a program that allows you to track reach and exposure for each hashtag individually, and we track them for a 2-week period following the workshop for each of the conferences. This slide shows the total number of tweets delivered by presenters and learners at both of our meetings. So for reference, there was 126 in-person participants at the workshop, 64 participants at PAS, and 62 participants at SAEM. For PAS, we had a total of 409 tweets delivered, including one of our hashtags, of which 76% were from our presenters and 24% were from learners. At SAEM, we had a total of 389 tweets delivered containing one of our hashtags, of which 84% were generated from our presenters and 16% were generated from learners. This slide shows the reach of our two hashtags over the course of the two workshops and the two meetings. So in blue, or on the x-axis, is our time, and then on the y-axis is the measured reach. The blue line represents hashtag not another boring lecture, which shows that at the end of our two conferences, we were able to reach a total of 47,200 users with our content. And the yellow line is for hashtag Innovate MedEd, and that shows that we were able to reach 36,400 individual users by the end of our two conferences. This slide represents the exposure of our two hashtags at the two meetings. So again, we have time listed on the x-axis and exposure listed on the y-axis. For Not Another Boring Lecture, by the end of the two workshops, we were able to have 136,400 units of exposure, and for Innovate MedEd, we had 79,100 units of exposure. So in looking at our data, our hashtag Not Another Boring Lecture was able to reach 47,200 individual users on Twitter. This is a near 400-fold increase in the number of people who attended the workshops in person. Additionally, presenter-initiated tweeting can greatly increase one's presence within the conference. Using PAS as an example, there were 2,063 tweets that contained the conference-specific hashtag PAS meeting, and we had 409 tweets at that same meeting, so that's approximately 25% of all of the tweets at PAS. Our limitations to our study: there was no control arm to the study. This was just a single arm intervention study. The use of multiple hashtags may have complicated our analysis by providing some overestimation, as sometimes the hashtags were used simultaneously. And lastly, TweetReach Pro provides an estimate of values. So if our content was delivered in a tweet that didn't contain one of the hashtags, it was not included in the analysis. So there was a potential for some underestimation in our metrics as well. So implications of our study: we found that using Twitter can increase the reach and exposure of a lecturer's content. However, further studies are required to determine if that increased reach and exposure does equate to increased user engagement. And Piglets allow the presenter to take control of the content. So rather than allowing your learners to share what they think is the most important topics in your lecture, you as a presenter are allowed to convey all the key points that you want to. And I'd just like to thank the rest of my research team: Mary, Melissa, Steve, Meg, Sally, and Rob.
Thanks, and you have a platform presentation at PAS as well. Yeah,
yes.
So you're in quite good shape for that. So thank you. Do we have time for one question?
So if they, it seemed like people are getting, obviously, from the tweets, very abbreviated pieces from that, although you're getting the exposure. Is there any way to measure, if you put links in the tweets, or have you tried to evaluate how many people actually go to those links and open them up? It might be hard to know if there are ones who got the tweets, but...
Sure. Yeah, so there is a new metric out called engagement that the same program actually studies now, but didn't at the time of our analysis. And what engagement does is it measures every time somebody clicks on the tweet or clicks on the link within your tweet. So that would be a way to measure whether or not someone then went to the primary article for that topic.